I clutched the phone in my hand so tightly that my fingers turned white, and indignation boiled in my chest, but I managed to hold back the lump in my throat that threatened to break into a scream. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, but there was a hint of pent-up rage in it anyway. "You can't be serious, Mom. I'm barely making ends meet, working my ass off to pay this rent, and now I have to support Anna. She's an adult, why can't she pay at least part of it?" I heard my mother sigh heavily on the other end of the line, and then, after a characteristic pause, I realized that she had crossed her arms over her chest, preparing for her unchanging position of absolute rightness. "Anna is my daughter just like you," her voice turned icy, "and I'm not going to leave her to her fate. She's going through a difficult period, she needs to live somewhere, and you have a place, and you should be grateful for that." I felt anger start to pulse in my temples. "Are you grateful?" "Grateful for what?" "For being confronted with a fact. Because I have to work even harder to provide for my sister while she lies on my couch and plays a tape on her phone?" I turned to Anna, who didn't seem to feel the slightest bit awkward, settling in as if she had been living here for a long time. She lazily raised her eyes from the screen, looked at me with a slight perplexity, as if she didn't understand why I was so turned on at all, and then, shrugging her shoulders, she turned back to her phone. "This is out of the question, Janice," Mom continued, her voice getting even tougher. "If you don't like it, the door is open. No one is holding you back." At that moment, I realized that no amount of arguments would change her mind. In my mother's eyes, I was just an ungrateful egotist who didn't want to help her own sister. But the scariest thing wasn't that, it was that I really had nowhere to go. If I say I'm moving out now, I'll end up on the street, without a roof over my head, without savings, with only a job in a cafe that won't hold up a normal apartment. I gripped the phone even harder, felt my nails digging into my palm, but didn't answer. I just disconnected the call and froze, staring into the void. Anna seemed to have decided that the conversation was over, because she got up from the couch, stretched, looked around the apartment and, clearly not bothering with requests or explanations, picked up one of the suitcases and headed towards my bedroom. I blinked in disbelief. "What are you doing?" My voice was quieter than I'd intended, but there was tension in it. Anna looked over her shoulder, put on a slight smile, and said as calmly as if it were a matter of course, "Well, I'm not going to sleep on the couch. You don't mind if I take your room, do you?" Anna narrowed her eyes, clearly not expecting such a reaction from me, but I wasn't going to back down. I already had nothing to lose. There was a dull, heavy feeling in my chest, as if I were being squeezed by a huge slab, but for the first time since she moved in, I felt like I was able to breathe, able to control the situation, at least a little. "You can't kick me out," she said defiantly, crossing her arms over her chest, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. I took a step forward, squeezed the paper with the utility bills in my hand so that it crumpled, and said clearly, almost syllabically, "I can. And I will do it." She opened her mouth, clearly about to utter another mocking phrase, but I raised my hand, preventing her from saying a word. "I'm not your maid, Anna. And I'm not going to work around the clock to pay for your spa days and turn on the lights all over the apartment. If you're not ready to pay your share, you can pack your bags right now and leave." I saw her clench her teeth as irritation flashed on her face, mixed with some kind of childish whim. She's always been used to having everything done the way she wants it done. She's used to her mom pulling her out of every mess over and over again, that she doesn't have to take care of anything because there's always someone who will do it for her. But I wasn't a mom. I saw something like fear flash in her eyes, but the next second she resumed her usual arrogant look, grinned and said, "You're acting like a real bitch, you know?" I didn't even blink. "Pack your things," I replied coldly. She exhaled noisily, ostentatiously rolled her eyes and suddenly plopped down on the sofa again, threw one leg over the other and stretched with obvious pleasure, showing that she was not going to leave. "No," she said shortly, turning back to her phone. I felt anger rising in me. I took a step forward, snatched the phone out of her hands, and slammed it down on the coffee table. "Did you misunderstand me?" I hissed, barely restraining myself from screaming. Anna looked at me in amazement, her face paled, and then turned purple with anger. "Are you crazy?" She jumped to her feet, but I didn't back down. "No, Anna, you're crazy if you think you can behave like that," I said quickly, clearly, without letting her get a word in. "I'm not your babysitter, I'm not your mother, and I'm certainly not your sponsor. You live here for free, you spend my money, you make a mess, you don't even bother to turn off the lights. Am I supposed to put up with this?" "Why?" "Because Mom said so." I paused briefly, watching her get more and more annoyed, but I continued without giving her the slightest chance to interrupt. "I live here because I pay for it, and you live here because Mom wanted you to, but guess what? Mom doesn't live here. This is my apartment, and I decide who stays here." Anna pursed her lips, clearly digesting my words, but I wasn't going to stop. I pointed to the suitcases still standing against the wall. "You can either find a job and start contributing your share, or pack up these things and leave, because I'm not going to support you anymore." She stood in front of me, breathing heavily, clenching her fists, and I could see a whole hurricane of emotions raging inside her: anger, resentment, confusion. For the first time in a long time, Anna didn't know what to say, because for the first time in her life, someone was setting strict boundaries for her. A full minute passed in tense silence before she abruptly turned around, grabbed her phone from the table and shot me a withering look. "You're going to regret this," she said through clenched teeth, and picking up one of the suitcases, she headed for my bedroom, slamming the door loudly. I closed my eyes, clutching the back of the chair, and only now realized that my hands were shaking. I just did something I've been afraid of for so long. I've given you an ultimatum. But knowing Anna, I knew she wouldn't give up so easily. I was looking at this document, and my thoughts were racing chaotically in my head, bumping into each other like broken glass fragments, not forming a single picture, because it was too absurd, too unexpected to be true. I reread line after line, checking every word, every letter, as if fearing that this was just a game of my heated imagination caused by anger, fatigue, and stress of the last few weeks. But the document remained the same, unchanging, ruthlessly clear. The apartment I had paid for, had to fight for, had to endure Anna's whims and my mother's dictates, belonged to me. I squeezed the paper in my fingers, feeling a new feeling grow in my chest: not anger, not resentment, not even indignation, but the icy, frightening realization that I had been betrayed. Mom. She knew. She knew all this time and deliberately hid it from me, pretending she was doing me a favor by renting me an apartment that was rightfully mine. She took the money that I earned by the sweat of my brow, working nights, denying herself everything to pay the rent on time, and calmly spent it, knowing that she had no right to it. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to cope with the surge of emotions, but it only made it worse. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it pounding in my temples, my breathing was short, and for a moment I felt like I was losing my balance, as if the ground was falling out from under my feet. I had to sit down, otherwise I would have just collapsed. I sank right to the floor, clutching this betrayal in my hands, this cold, officially certified deception, and I couldn't figure out what to do now. One option was obvious: to call my mom, tell her that I know everything, force her to explain herself. But as soon as I imagined this conversation, I realized that it was pointless. She was always a master at turning any situation in her favor, making me guilty, playing on my sense of duty, manipulating and blackmailing. I could already hear her voice in my head: "How dare you doubt me? Is this your gratitude for everything I've done for you? Didn't I give you a roof over your head?" And I didn't need to know how she would continue, because I already knew it didn't matter to her that the truth was on my side. The only thing that mattered to her was her power over me. I stood up abruptly, feeling rage boiling inside me, even stronger than a minute ago. I won't play along anymore. I will not be silent. I'm not going to let her keep holding me on a leash like an obedient puppy that has to wag its tail, and thank you for throwing dice off the table. If this apartment is mine, then it's up to me to decide who lives in it. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through my contact list, and found the number of the lawyer who services the college paid for students in difficult situations. I didn't know if he could help me, but I needed to find out the truth. To find out if I have a legitimate reason to expel Anna and stop this bullying once and for all. While the phone was buzzing waiting for an answer, the bedroom door opened and Anna appeared on the threshold. Her face was furious, her cheeks were flushed, and her lips curled into a contemptuous smile. "What are you wrestling for so long?" she barked, putting her hands on her hips. "Are you going to fuck off at all, or are you just going to make a show?" I slowly raised my head and looked at her. I was no longer shaking with rage, my legs were no longer weak, my breath was no longer choked with helplessness. Instead, an icy calm spread inside me, cold as a knife blade. I clutched the will in my hand, picked it up, and the moment the lawyer on the other end of the line finally answered, I looked Anna straight in the eye and, smiling, said, "I've changed my mind. I'm staying." I felt rage rising inside me like a storm, sweeping away the last remnants of trust in my mother, in her path, to the words that she had put in my head for years, to the rules that she forced me to follow, to the very essence of our relationship, which, as it turned out, was not built on love and caring, but based on lies, self-interest, and manipulation. I ran my hand over my face, as if trying to erase the veil of naivety that had been clouding my eyes for so long, and forced myself to take a deep breath to regain my composure, but my breathing was still racing, and my heart was pounding as if it were trying to escape from my chest. I slowly lowered my gaze to the will, still clutching it in my fingers, as if I was afraid that if I let go, it would disappear like an illusion, like a ghostly hope that was given to me only to immediately take it away. But the document was real, and it meant that now I had power, my own, legitimate power, and for the first time in a long time I was ready to use it. Anna was still standing in the bedroom doorway, arms crossed over her chest, tapping her elbow nervously with her finger. Her usual self-confidence was gone, replaced by tension, which she tried unsuccessfully to hide behind a feigned contempt. She clearly felt that something had changed, but she didn't understand what it was yet. "What are you whispering about?" Finally, she couldn't stand it, taking a quick glance at the piece of paper in my hand. "What kind of drama are you making here?" I looked up at her and for the first time looked at her directly, openly, without fear, without hesitation, without the desire to smooth corners or avoid conflict. I saw a flicker of concern in her eyes, as she shifted slightly from one foot to the other, not knowing what to expect, and from this an icy, predatory satisfaction spread inside me. "Oh, nothing special, just reading something interesting." I folded the will in four and slowly shoved it into my jeans pocket, not taking my eyes off her. "For example, that this apartment is mine." Anna frowned, her eyebrows shot up, but the next moment she snorted and rolled her eyes, as if I had said something incredibly stupid. "Don't start, Janice. We all know that the apartment belongs to Mom. She said it herself." "Really?" I tilted my head as if studying her, as if only now noticing how pathetic she was, how empty her bravado was, how fake her arrogant tone became when confronted with real facts. "Then why is it written here in my grandmother's will in black and white that she left the apartment to me?" Anna abruptly stopped grinning. I saw how she tensed, how a shadow of doubt crossed her face, how she blinked quickly, trying to think of what to say, how she opened her mouth, but immediately closed it, not finding a suitable answer. "You're lying," she said at last, but her voice trembled, and there was the whole truth in that tremor. "Oh, if only." I slowly pulled the paper out of my pocket and unfolded it, defiantly holding it in front of me. "But, alas, this is a legal document, and it says in a very, very real handwriting that I have been deceived all these years." I took a step forward, and Anna instinctively stepped back without even realizing it. So, you know what? I continued, feeling my indignation turn into icy determination with every word, into a sense of strength that I had been missing so much all these years. Now I'm dictating the living conditions in this apartment. Anna blinked, then frowned, her lips pressed into a thin line. You can't kick me out, she said, but there was no confidence in her voice. I grinned, folded the will, and put it back in my pocket. Oh, I can. And I'm going to. She wanted to say something, to object, but at that moment my phone rang again. Mom's name appeared on the screen again. I looked at him, then looked at Anna, who also saw who was calling, and immediately took a step forward, as if it was vital for her to hear this conversation. I slowly picked up the phone, put it to my ear, and before Mom could say a word, she said in a flat, cold voice, "We need to talk." I was sitting in a spacious office, feeling strangely out of place, as if I was not a client here, but an outsider who accidentally got into someone else's story, although this story belonged entirely to me. Across from me, at a massive desk with perfectly straight stacks of papers, sat a man in his 50s with graying temples and an attentive, piercing gaze that seemed to see right through me. He took his time, studying the documents, turning the pages with the unhurried confidence that people have when they are used to important things, and for some reason it gave me strength. I steepled my fingers, feeling my palms sweat, but I forced myself not to turn away, not to show a drop of doubt. I knew I was right. For the first time in a long time, I had not only feelings, but also facts, and I was not going to back down. You have a very strong position, the lawyer finally said, straightening up in his chair and throwing his pen on the table. The will is legally impeccable, the apartment really belongs to you. All rent payments are documented, they went to your mother's personal account without any legal justification, which means they can be challenged. He leaned forward slightly, clasping his fingers together, and looked at me intently. Tell me, what exactly do you want to achieve? A full refund of all funds? Compensation for moral damage? Sister's eviction? I hesitated for a second, because for the first time in weeks, I felt how far things had gone. A few days ago, I just wish Anna would get out of here and leave me alone. A few hours ago, all I wanted to do was return the money and forget about it all like a bad dream. But now, sitting in this office, I realized that it's not just about money and not even just about the apartment. It's about justice. I want everything, I finally replied, and my voice sounded firm, even though my heart was pounding like crazy in my chest. Every penny. Full legal recognition that this apartment belongs to me. And that Anna would never cross that threshold again. The lawyer nodded, his face remained impassive, but there was a flicker of approval in his eyes. Then we'll begin. Returning home, for the first time in a long time, I did not feel the usual weight on my shoulders. Yes, I had a difficult process ahead of me, yes, I knew that my mother would not give up without a fight, that she would call, write, try to convince me to change my mind, and when that did not work, threaten and blackmail, but now everything was different. Now I knew that I had protection, there was a law, there was evidence, and most importantly, I had the desire to go all the way. I walked into the apartment, and as expected, Anna was still there, still acting like nothing had changed, like I owed her a favor, not the other way around. She was sprawled out on the couch, with her feet up, a cup of tea in one hand and her phone in the other, and she didn't even bother to pretend to be doing anything useful. How long are you staying, by the way? She said, without even looking up from the screen. I took off my coat, slowly put my bag on the table, and only then answered. No, not for long. Just for as long as it takes to get you out of here once and for all. She finally looked up at me with a hint of annoyance. Are you back with your drama? Oh, Janice, will you ever learn to relax? I grinned, came closer, took the will out of my pocket and casually threw it in front of her. I'll learn. As soon as I get rid of you. The mother's face, purple with anger, twisted into an evil grimace. Her eyes flashed lightning, and her hands clenched into fists so tightly that the knuckles turned white. I could see her trembling with rage, but there was something else in her gaze through the raging hatred: fear. The fear that, for the first time in her life, she was facing the consequences of her actions, that her power over me, carefully built up over years of manipulation, had suddenly collapsed. "You're not going to do this," she hissed, shaking her head slowly, as if trying to convince herself rather than me. "You wouldn't dare take me to court, make a fool of me in front of everyone, and disgrace your family." I sighed, crossing my arms over my chest, and shaking my head. I said slowly, "I won't do it if you give me the money. Completely. On time." Her lips twitched, her face contorted in a new fit of anger, but now it was mixed with panic. I knew she hadn't counted on it. She thought I was just going to get angry and scream, but in the end I would give up, accept her fake apologies, and let the situation be hushed up. But this was not the Janice she had known before. "I don't have that kind of money," she almost shouted, spreading her arms. "It's not my problem," I replied calmly, looking her straight in the eye. She grabbed the demand letter, crumpled it in her fist, and hurled it in my face with a furious hiss, but I didn't even move. It didn't mean anything anymore. "You're going to destroy our family." "What is it?" she exclaimed, but her voice no longer sounded so much indignation as despair. I grinned, shaking my head. "Family?" I repeated slowly, unclenching my fist and letting the crumpled paper fall onto the table. "I didn't destroy the family, Mom. That's what you did when you decided to cheat on your daughter." We stood opposite each other like two opponents on a battlefield. She was exhausted but not giving up. I was calm but implacable. For the first time in my life, I felt stronger than she did. For the first time, she was forced to consider me instead of me. It seemed like an eternity before she exhaled noisily, looked away, and, after giving me one last angry look, grabbed her bag and, loudly tapping her heels, headed for the exit. "You're going to regret this, Janice," she called over her shoulder before slamming the door behind her. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, listening to her footsteps fade away in the hallway, and finally allowed myself to exhale. I knew it wasn't over yet, but the first step had been taken. It was my game now, and this time I was setting the rules. I remembered sitting on the edge of the bed, smoothing the hem of the dress my mother had bought me especially for that day, and how I stared at it for a long time, trying to cope with the resentment that seemed to me like a childish whim. After all, I always did what was needed, what was expected, and if that day it seemed important to my mother that I stay with Anna, then that's how it should be. I remember sighing heavily, pulling my dress over my head and pulling on an old t-shirt, and I remember going to Anna's bed, where she was wrapped in a blanket, sobbing piteously, complaining that she was so ill, while my mother gathered up her documents and left. Now, after all these years, I clearly understood that Anna had no fever. It was a performance, a subtly staged scene, another cleverly staged lie that I was not allowed to doubt. And everything that happened after that, my ignorance, my naivety, my willingness to accept my mother's words for the truth, all this was the result of that very scene. I was not present at the transfer of the will. I did not see it with my own eyes. I did not even hear the notary, because at that moment I was sitting at home, rubbing a cold compress on Anna's forehead, while Mom legitimized her deception. I could feel my fists clenching, my nails digging into my palms, but I didn't even try to hold back, because the anger that surged through me was righteous, pure, and icy. It was not the anger of a child who was offended by a parent, not a teenage outburst of emotions, but the realization of betrayal, soaked to the last drop with calculation and manipulation. "Janice, are you there?" Carol's voice snapped me out of my daze, and I blinked back to reality. "Yes, I'm sorry." I forced myself to relax my fingers and bring the phone to my ear. "Are you okay?" I wanted to say yes, of course, but I suddenly realized that I didn't want to pretend. "No," I said honestly. "But I'll be there soon." I dropped the call, slowly got up from the couch and walked over to the bookcase, running my fingers over the spines of the books. It was the place where I accidentally found the will, the place where my path to the truth began. I opened the bottom drawer where I kept my documents, took out a folder that now contained all the papers for the apartment, my bank statements, a copy of the demand letter, and a copy of the will. I ran my palm over the smooth cardboard, feeling my resolve grow inside me. I had won this battle, but there was still more to come. It wasn't just the apartment I needed back. I needed to get myself back. And I knew where I was going to start. I'm sitting in this chair, rocking back and forth slightly, warming my palms on a ceramic mug with thin cracks on the glaze, inhaling the aroma of coffee mixed with a slight smell of old books, paper, and something elusively familiar that has always hovered in this apartment. The rays of the morning sun glide across the floor, drawing long streaks of light, and at this moment I feel not only peace, but also confidence that I am exactly where I should be. I often think about my grandmother. About what kind of person she really was, what she thought when she made her will, whether she knew that her will could be distorted, whether she foresaw the storm her latest decision would cause. I want to believe that she saw in me a power that I didn't realize at the time, that I knew that one day, despite all the lies, I would find the truth, that I would have the courage to demand my own, even if it meant going through pain and betrayal. I imagine her here, in this very room, sitting in this armchair with a book in her hands, and I catch myself thinking that it doesn't hurt so much anymore. Yes, there's still a heaviness in my chest, resentment smolders somewhere in the back of my mind, but now it's just a part of me, not anger, not bitterness, but just a scar, reminding me of what I've been through, what I've been able to do. The memories no longer tear me apart, but they still come, sometimes suddenly, in great detail. I remember how my mother taught me to be economical, how she looked with mock pride when I counted the change in my wallet before going to the store, and then calmly spent my money without batting an eye. I remember when Anna was a child, she could throw something heavy at me, and when I complained, my mother would cluck her tongue and say, "Well, you're the eldest, be wiser." As a father, he always stood aside, not interfering, even when he saw that I was feeling bad. But now it has no power over me anymore. I learned to live without their approval, without their manipulation, without their false sense of duty. I'm not looking for their love anymore, I'm not waiting for apologies, because I know they won't be there, and if they are, it's only when they need something again. Their calls have become quieter, less frequent, although I know that they are still somewhere nearby, watching from afar, hoping that I will change my mind, that I will return, that they will be able to pull me back into their web. But I'm not coming back. Now I have me. I continue to work, I continue to study, I continue to build my life, and even if I don't wallow in luxury, I spend every penny I earn on myself, knowing that no one will take away from me what is rightfully mine. I feel free in a way I've never felt before. I understand that my story is not unique, that betrayal of relatives is a wound that hurts for a particularly long time, but I also know that strength is not only the ability to fight, but also the ability to let go, close the door and not look back. I did it, and now this place is my home, not a cage. I finish my coffee, put the mug on the windowsill and look out the window. A new day is waking up in the city, and there is no more room for the past that held me down. Now I live for myself.